Well, this is a great gospel that we have today. It starts off with, you've heard it said, you shall not kill, and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, and this is in the phrase of, your righteousness must surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees. The problem with the scribes and Pharisees, they certainly knew the law, but that's all they really knew, and they certainly didn't know mercy. For instance, they always kept complaining that Jesus was coming to abolish the law and Moses and the prophets. And for instance, that was because Jesus would heal on the Sabbath, which was considered a work. And Jesus did not condemn the woman caught in adultery. As a teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. Moses gave us the law concerning this woman. What do you say? And the law was that she should be stoned to death. And Jesus, instead of answering whether she should be stoned to death or not, simply said, let the person who is without sin throw the first stone. And so they were totally at odds because Jesus was talking about mercy and they were just talking about the law. And that's why he says, there's got to be more to it than just this. There's got to be more to it than just this. You know, sometimes people break laws, but also sometimes laws break people. It's true. And sometimes it's impossible to do some of the things that you might be asked to do, depending upon what your circumstances are in life. Jesus once said, to whom much is given, much is expected. And part of that has to do with what is it that we are actually capable of? What is it we are conscious of? And sometimes, we used to talk about, and the wonderful thing about the old church is that it had so much memorization, questions and answers. And so there was almost an answer for everything, just as there was a question for everything. And in fact, remember, like, what was it, FrGerry Home Companion, where you're trying to answer life's solve the answers to life's persistent questions? I didn't get it completely right, but so here we have, Jesus is saying, look, there's more to this. When he says, you've heard the commandment, you shall not kill. Now, that's pretty limiting, but it's not very broad. One time, 1 billion years ago, I was a young priest hearing confessions, and a person came in. It was during those times where we were telling people, come to confession. If you haven't been to confession in a while, come back. It was during Lent, and they said every Wednesday there's going to be priests in the churches all throughout the archdiocese. Come in and, go to confession. And so a lot of people did, and some of them hadn't been in decades. One person came in, and we were really excited about people coming in who hadn't been in a long while. But if it's been a long while since your last confession, where do you begin? And one person wanted to come in and said, Father, it's been, I can't even remember how long it's been, decades. He says, how shall I start? I said, well, what comes to mind? And I thought it might be something that really was on their heart or bothered them or so. And he says, well, I haven't murdered anybody. And since I was the only one in church with this man next to me, I was really pleased that he hadn't murdered anybody. I thought this is at least a good beginning for me, as opposed to somebody going like, I really have a hard time, Father, controlling my temper, and you really make me mad. So, okay, God bless you. But there's so much more to what is it that we owe God. It's not just the 10 Commandments. The old church used to talk about, that you had ignorance, but you could be taught. So even if you didn't know any better, you could be improved. But then there was also people that could not be taught. And so we had a difference between what was called vincible and invincible ignorance. Somebody didn't know, but they could learn. And there's other people in life that said, you can't tell me. In which case you say, that's right, you're invincibly ignorant. We can't tell you. So the church had all these different categories that we could fit into. St. Paul said something like, he says, love makes up for a multitude of sins. Love makes up for a multitude of sins. And so when Jesus says to his disciples, you've heard it said, you shall not kill. I say, don't even grow angry. Don't grow angry. At the point he said, you've heard it said also an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Yeah. I say, don't render evil for evil. It was an entirely different way of understanding. And so when the scribes and Pharisees said, this man has come to subvert the law of Moses and the prophets, Jesus says, I've not come to do away with it. I've not come to abolish it. Not the smallest letter, not even the smallest part of a letter would be done away with until it is all fulfilled. And so then he was able to move from, I haven't killed anybody, to, well, have you grown angry with anyone? And the whole idea of not committing adultery says, well, of course you shouldn't commit adultery, but why stop there just at the act? Why not begin a little bit early with regard to thinking about it? I mean, where's that going to lead you? Isn't it better to, instead of just saying, well, I have not done this, to not even begin to move in that direction? In this way to kind of protect what is sanctified and reserved for marriage? It makes sense. It's the fulfillment of the law. And at one point, Jesus said, as they were complaining because his disciples didn't wash their hands before they ate, and Jesus, healed on the Sabbath. And so he went and said, you guys are blind guides. You're all nice and shiny on the outside because you keep all of these little rituals and commandments. But inside, you're full of filth and corruption like dead men's bones. And so people are walking, and you're like a grave that is hidden. On the outside, it all seems fine. On the inside, it's full of filth and corruption. You lay a heavy burden on other people's shoulders without yourself lifting a finger to budge them. So the scribes and Pharisees were always ready to tell people how they were sinning, where they were failing. As when Jesus is healing, come back on another day to be healed. This is the Sabbath. You would have thought people would have said, go get the people, tell them to come here. Somebody's healing, and we haven't seen this in a long while. And so, but somebody said Sunday Shmonday, or Sabbath Shmabbath, tell them to come. God is alive and working. Remember the time where there was the pool at Bethsaida? And the story was that when the angel of God stirred up the waters, the first people that could get into the water would be healed. And there's this one man there who had been sick for years and years and years. And Jesus, as a teacher, as a man grown to maturity, comes to him and says, I've seen you here all this time. Why is this? And he says, whenever the water's stirred up, I have no one to help me get in. And by the time, someone else gets there ahead of me. And so then Jesus says, well, pick up your mat and walk. And then, of course, all heck breaks loose because Jesus is healing on the Sabbath. How do we discern and see God's will? And how do we go about doing it in a way that is fervent and fulfilling and more than just the minimum? I haven't killed anybody, but how many times do we say, I'm really sorry that I have such a bad temper? I've often thought that you could hurt people just as bad with a strong word as with a strong fist. You could really crush some people just verbally. And some people are very vulnerable. All they need is just a little bit of push, and then they're off over the edge. One time St. Paul says, when you speak, let it be as the things said by God. Isn't that great? When you speak, let it be as the things said by God. At one point, Jesus says, the children of this world are much more industrious than the children of the light. The children of this world are much more industrious than the children of the light. It has to do when it comes to getting what they want. Now, he said this after the parable of the unjust steward. Remember, there was the story in, I think it's Luke, I got it marked in here, a story of the person who, the master finds out that his steward has been, skimming from him, and he says, what's this I hear about you? Come and give an accounting because you're going to be let go. And the steward says to himself, what can I do? My master has found me out. I am not strong enough to dig, and I am too ashamed to beg. And so what he does is he hauls in all of the creditors, and he changes what they owe. If someone says, how much do you owe? 100 sheaves of wheat. Take your invoice, write down 40, or whatever the number is. And it says, then the master finds this out, but he actually praises the guy for his enterprise. Because the man says, now this way, when I am let go, I will have made friends with other people who may take me into their house. And at the expense of the master, he's feathering his nest against the time that he's going to be fired and let go. And so, if you're working for yourself, that's a great that really gives you a sense of commitment. You're working for yourself. Some of the people that I've known who've had their own restaurants or their own companies, they are putting in so much time, and sometimes they don't even get themselves paid just to be able to keep the company going. And yet, have you ever seen people that were sometimes call themselves Christian, but for some reason they seem to be off the clock? I've always said, I point all the fingers in my direction. I'm sorry. Sometimes if I've been driving down the road, I've told you this before, and somebody cuts me off, and I've had it where I was so angry, and I wanted to get up next to the person and let them know just how much I appreciated what they did. And then I realized, as I was getting ready to wind the window down, this is a while back before you had push-button windows, wind the window down, I saw in the reflection of the window that I was wearing my collar. And then when I pulled up alongside the guy at the light, he looked at me and I went, "Oh, Father, thank you." How is it that we could possibly be as industrious for God as we would be for ourselves? Here's what Archbishop Tillotson wrote. This was in the 1900s. And he said this as to part of the reason why people, the children of this world, are more industrious than the children of the light. He says 3 things. 1, he says, first, they're usually more firmly fixed upon what it is they want, that is, their end. And so the children of this world are wiser in the choice of the means to their end, and something that will bring about that desired end with less pain and difficulty and expensive time than others. So not only are they fixed upon their end, they pick the easiest means to the end, and then they're commonly more diligent in the use of these means for the obtaining of their end. They will sweat and toil and take any pains, rise up early and lie down late, and eat the bread of carefulness. Their thoughts are continually running upon their business, and they catch at every opportunity of promoting it. They will pinch nature and harass it, rob themselves of the rest and all the comfort of their lives to raise their fortune and their estate. So the people of this world, the children of this world, are more invincibly constant and pertinacious in the pursuit of earthly things, not to be daunted by difficulties or dashed out of countenance by the frowns and reproaches of people. Have you ever heard the saying, "It's only business. It's just business"? The people of this world will make all things stoop and submit to that which is their great end and design. Their end rules them and governs them and gives license to all their actions. They will make an advantage of everything, and if will not serve their end one way or the other, they will have nothing to do with it. Now, it says this. Well, let me say, for ourselves, if you're intent on building fame or riches or fortune or whatever it is in life, you may find that the path to that, is putting your nose to the grindstone. But if you're trying to be a Christian, it then means not so much getting things as giving things, not so much amassing things as letting go of things. And that's hard to do, first of all. If it was easy, everybody else would be running after the things of heaven. The other thing that's hard about it is heaven is out there. We talk about heaven on earth, and we are building the city of God. But the reality is that these things will only be fulfilled at some future time. Whereas what you can get now with the here and now, you can suddenly touch and see the substantial reward. Whereas Jesus said one time, anyone who gives a cup of cold water in my name will not lack for their reward. But that's in the kingdom of heaven, not necessarily something that happens here. How many times have you really put yourself out for somebody and you've got nothing back, right? The satisfaction should be that you were just, or that you were honest, or that you did not take advantage, or that you were generous. That should be the satisfaction. And sometimes none of that comes back. As parents, have you ever felt sometimes that your children don't really appreciate everything that you've done for them? Don't all stand up at one time. And in fact, as children, Don't you sometimes find that it wasn't until you become parents yourself you begin to then say to yourself, oh my God, what did I do? And that's the lesson of when we have the scripture that talks about people coming to maturity with regard to the law of love. It says this: the children of this world have but one design and are wholly intent upon it. And this is a great advantage. Application to one thing, especially in matters of practice, gains a man or woman perfect experience in it. And experience gives them observations, and these make them wise and prudent in that thing. But children of the light, good men and women, though they have a great affection for heaven and heavenly things, yet they don't live only in that world. The business and necessities of this life very much divert them and take them off from the care of only the things of heaven. And so they're divided between the concerns of this life that are necessary and the concerns of the life to come. And though there was one thing really necessary in comparison for eternal life, yet the needs of life cannot be disregarded. And though our souls should be our main care, yet we also have some consideration must be made of our life in this world. So we cannot always and wholly apply ourselves merely to heavenly things and to mind them as the children of the world do, the things of this world. It then says, the children of the world have a greater liberty in the pursuit of their worldly designs than good people have in the prosecution of their interests. The children of light are limited and confined to the use of lawful means for the encompassing of their ends. But the people of the world are not so straight-laced. They're resolved upon the point, and they will slack at no means to accomplish it. I've often been surprised at some of the things that people, I don't know, I've been surprised at some of the good that people do. I'm really surprised that somebody's like, God, that was so good. How did you do that? That was, oh my God, that was amazing what you just did. How did you do that? You know, it was so kind. It was so selfless. You were so patient. And yet there are other people that when you look at it, you go, how could somebody do that? For instance, Bernie Madoff. His last name was perfect. He made off with people's pensions and securities and their savings. You know, how could somebody do that? Knowing what you were doing to the lives of the people that trusted you. When there's a tornado or a hurricane or something and people are disenfranchised from their houses, and there are still people who will go in and will then loot to take whatever is left from this poor person's possessions that haven't been completely ruined, or, you know, they will come claiming to fix the house up by pretending to be a contractor and say, give us the money and we will go and buy the supplies and then we'll come back and repair your roof. I don't know how people do that, except it has to do with, you know, how industrious the children of this world are as opposed to the children of the light. So it's an amazing thing to me. And I must admit it's a mystery as to how people that are made in the image and likeness of God can stray to serving something that is not of God's will, not of God's way, but simply of their own way, their own wants and needs. I can't imagine that it really makes you happy, though perhaps temporarily you're getting something out of it. I've never known anybody that as they mature, I shouldn't say that this way, looking at myself, as I mature and get older, I reflect back not so much on the things that I did that I shouldn't have done, although I do reflect on those, of course, but as the things that I could have done and did not do. Because there's no way to go back and make that up. And to have missed an opportunity to have done something really good for somebody. And when I look back and say, what was the reason why? It could be I didn't think about it, because I was only thinking of myself. The other thing is that I was off the clock. I said, that's enough. You know, so the person that begins their confession by saying, well, I haven't murdered anybody. And by the way, if you're here, you were great. I love you, by the way. I never forgot your confession. Just remember that. But Jesus one time said, if there's a servant out working in the fields and then he comes in and he sees the master at the table, does he expect the master to wait on him and feed him? He says, no. The servant waits on the master, feeds the master. And then when the master is fed, the master says, now you may take your time and may eat. And Jesus says, in the same way, it must be that way with you. You know, when you have done everything that was expected of you, that's the fullness of the law. When you have done everything that was expected of you, not just what's circumscribed or limited, but everything that you could do in the discipleship of Christ, in sharing the love of God with someone else. Then once that's happened, you simply say, we are just useless servants. We've only done what was expected of us. Because he said, do you think the master would be grateful to the servant for the work that he did? That's what's expected. At one point, when the disciples were asking, what are the limits? Because we are human, you'd like to know, what are the limits? Peter looked at what the law said and said, you can forgive somebody 3 times, and then after that, if they sin against you, then after that, you can have nothing to do with them. Treat them as you would a Gentile or a tax collector. And so Peter says to Jesus, Lord, how many times must I forgive? 7 times? And what he did, he took the 2 times 3 and added 1 to it for a good measure. And when Jesus says, no, Simon, not 7 times, Peter's probably thinking, yeah, I thought that was excessive. What he says is 70 times, 7 times, I say to you, which means you always give. You always forgive. When he says, if someone presses you into service for 1 mile, go an extra mile. If somebody sues you for your cloak, give them your shirt as well. And it had to do with, could our goodness and generosity, be in line with what we have received from God? What you have received as a gift, you must give as a gift.